I'd been waiting for that day for years. The boardroom smelled of polished wood and expensive cologne, the kind of scent that said success belonged here. I sat tall, my blazer perfectly pressed, the presentation I'd spent nights perfecting sitting neatly in front of me. Today was supposed to be my moment. My husband, Daniel, stood at the head of the table, smiling like a politician. To everyone else, he was Mr. CEO. To me, he was the man who once promised we'd build this company together. He cleared his throat, scanning the room. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to announce our next executive promotion." My heart raced. I'd earned this. 10 years of loyalty, 12-hour days, weekends sacrificed, ideas stolen but never credited. It was finally my turn. Then I heard it. "Please congratulate Hazel," he said, gesturing toward the end of the table. "Our new head of client strategy." Hazel, his assistant, blinked, acting surprised, then stood up with that perfectly rehearsed smile. She wasn't even with us a full year. The room erupted in applause. Daniel walked over and pulled out the luxury chair beside him, the one reserved for senior executives, and motioned for her to sit. "You'll be taking this seat from now on," he said. "My seat. My spot." I tried to smile, but my throat tightened. Everyone clapped louder, pretending not to notice my face. The sound echoed like mockery. Hazel brushed her hair back and looked at me, just a flicker of something smug, before sitting down. I kept my hands folded under the table so no one could see them trembling. Inside, I could feel every promise he ever made to me turning to ash. He looked at me once, briefly. No apology, just satisfaction. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a message. A public reminder of who held the power now. I forced myself to nod, pretending to share the room's excitement. But inside, I was already breaking. That was the moment I realized my husband had chosen his new favorite. And it wasn't me. Before Daniel was my boss, he was my dreamer. We were just two broke graduates with matching coffee cups and too much ambition. I still remember the nights we spent on our old couch, scribbling business ideas on napkins, laughing at how someday our company's name would shine on a glass door. Back then, he'd look at me like I was his equal. His partner. His reason. When we finally launched the firm, I was the one cold calling clients while he handled the pitches. I built the brand decks, wrote the proposals, fixed the messes. He'd stand in front of investors and say, "We did this together." And every time he said we, I believed him. But success is a strange thing. It doesn't just change your life. It rearranges who people become inside it. As the company grew, the word "we" started disappearing from his vocabulary. I'd walk into meetings and hear him refer to projects I led as his strategies. He'd joke that I was his behind-the-scenes genius. But what it really meant was, stay behind. At home, he'd bring work to dinner. He'd talk about expansion plans, new investors, and his team. I'd remind him I was part of that team once. He'd smile, the kind of smile that pats your head instead of holds your hand, and say, "You worry too much. Let me handle things." That was the start of the invisible wall. The first time I noticed the shift, he closed the office door during a meeting, without inviting me in. It was such a small thing, but it burned. Behind that door, decisions were made, ideas were stolen, and somewhere in the middle of all that success, I vanished. I told myself it was temporary. That once the company stabilized, he'd bring me back into the light. But every time that door clicked shut, I realized he liked it better that way. Me on the outside, him in control. And by the time Hazel arrived, that door didn't just close. It locked. She walked in one Monday morning wearing sunshine in perfume form. Hazel, that was her name. She was introduced as just a temporary assistant, someone to help Daniel with scheduling during the company's expansion. She couldn't have been more than 26, all bright eyes, confident laughter, and a wardrobe that somehow blurred the line between professional and distracting. The office buzzed around her like moths to a flame. Even the intern started standing a little taller when she passed. I told myself it was harmless. Daniel had hired assistants before, but there was something different this time. Not about her, but about him. He started showing up later to our shared breakfasts. "Early meetings," he said. His shirt smelled faintly of her floral perfume, that sweet, powdery kind that lingered long after she left the room. I noticed her name popping up more and more in email threads that had nothing to do with her department. One afternoon, I walked into the conference room to retrieve my notes and stopped in the doorway. There they were, laughing. Hazel was standing too close, showing him something on her tablet. He didn't move away. His hand brushed her arm when he reached for a pen. It wasn't overt, but it was intimate, familiar. When she noticed me, her expression didn't flinch. She just smiled, polite but knowing. "Hi," she said cheerfully. "Your husband was just helping me with the presentation slides." Your husband. The words hit harder than I expected. He didn't correct her. From that day, my work started disappearing under her name. Projects I had initiated were suddenly being revised by Hazel. Reports I'd written were signed off by her, with Daniel's compliments. When I brought it up, he brushed it aside. "You're being territorial," he said. "She's new, let her learn," but it wasn't learning. It was replacing. Every smile Hazel gave me felt dipped in honey and poison. And every laugh Daniel shared with her stripped another piece of me away. I used to walk into that office feeling like I belonged. Now, every time I stepped through those glass doors, I felt like an unwanted guest in a company I had helped create. And deep down, I knew. Hazel wasn't just an assistant. She was a warning. That night, dinner felt like a performance. Daniel sat across from me, scrolling through his phone between bites of steak, while I stared at the flickering candle between us. The same candlelight that once made us feel closer now only illuminated the silence. I cleared my throat. "So, Hazel's been doing a lot of your presentations lately." He didn't look up. "She's efficient." "I'm sure she is," I said, trying to sound casual. "Efficient enough to take over projects I've been leading for 3 years?" That made him glance up, just for a second. His jaw tightened. "You're reading too much into it. She's helping lighten your load." "My load?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean my position?" He set his fork down. "You've been emotional lately. Maybe take some time off. You're burnt out." There it was, the subtle gaslight. The kind that made me doubt my own sanity. He used to say I was the backbone of this company. Now I was just too emotional. "Daniel," I said softly, Are you sure this isn't about Hazel?" His eyes flashed. That quick defensive look people give when you hit too close to the truth. But instead of answering, he leaned back, smirked, and said, "You're jealous." "That's beneath you. Jealous." The word tasted like betrayal. I didn't even realize I was shaking until my wine glass trembled in my hand. He took a sip from his own, unbothered, and added, "Besides, Hazel's coming to the client dinner next week. She deserves to see how things are done at an executive level. That was our dinner, the one we hosted every year together." I forced a smile, pretending it didn't gut me. "Of course," I whispered. "She deserves it." He nodded, satisfied, the way a man does when he believes he's won an argument. But inside I wasn't angry anymore. I was numb. When he went upstairs, I sat there staring at his empty plate, my reflection faint in the wine glass. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like his wife. I felt like a placeholder, and that's when I knew, if lies could be served at dinner, I'd stop eating from his table. The hotel ballroom glowed with gold chandeliers and expensive perfume. Every year, Daniel and I hosted this dinner, our ritual of success. We'd greet the clients, raise glasses, share a smile that said we built this together. But this year, everything had changed. When I arrived, the hostess paused before asking, "Are you with Mr. Bennett's table?" I forced a polite nod. "Yes, I'm his wife." She checked the list. Her tone softened awkwardly. "Oh, your seat's been moved." Moved. My eyes followed her gesture, all the way to the far end of the hall. Hazel sat next to Daniel, her laugh sharp and bright under the chandelier, her hand brushing his arm as she showed something on her tablet. And the chair I used to sit in, the luxury seat reserved for co-founders and partners, now had her name card resting on the linen napkin. I could feel my pulse in my throat. The whispers started early. A few clients glanced at me, the way people look at someone who's been quietly replaced. Maybe she's just an assistant, one murmured. Then why is she seated next to the CEO? Another whispered back. I took my seat in the corner, pretending not to hear, pretending not to care. Daniel stood up to give his annual speech. Tonight, he began, we celebrate growth and the people who made it possible, especially Hazel, who's been instrumental in this quarter's expansion. Hazel smiled modestly. I nearly choked on my water. Those were my accounts, my proposals, and as the room erupted in applause, I smiled too, a sharp, cold kind of smile. Because that's when I realized they weren't just erasing my title, they were erasing me. When the dinner ended, Hazel approached me with a practiced sweetness. Loved your dress, she said. Vintage, right? I leaned in just enough for her to smell the calm in my voice. Yes, unlike your loyalty, her smile faltered. Just for a second, but that second was mine. As I walked out of that hall, the cameras flashing behind me, I promised myself one thing. If they wanted to write me out of this story, I'd make sure I rewrote the ending. I didn't cry that night. I thought I would, after seeing Hazel in my seat, after hearing Daniel praise her with my words, but instead, something colder took root. Silence. The kind that doesn't come from pain, but from clarity. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in front of my laptop. The files, the contracts, the internal memos, every detail of the company I helped build, were still on my drive. Years of data, my fingerprints on everything they now claimed was theirs. Daniel had once said, "You're the brain of this company." He was right. And I finally remembered that. For hours I combed through old presentations, client emails, deal proposals, the paper trail of my work. I wasn't looking for proof of betrayal. I already had that. I was looking for leverage. By midnight I found it, a contract Hazel had signed under Daniel's supervision, one that violated confidentiality clauses. A friendly transfer of assets disguised as a temporary adjustment. It was sloppy, and it was illegal. I saved everything to an encrypted folder, labeled innocently, Q4 budget review. The next day, I walked into the office as if nothing had happened. My coworkers avoided my eyes, whispers following me like perfume. Hazel was already there, sitting in my old spot, acting like she'd always belonged. "Morning," she chirped, handing Daniel his coffee. "Morning," I replied, calm as a lake hiding its depth. Daniel looked at me. Guilt flickered, then disappeared. "You're in early," he said. I smiled. Old habits die hard. That week I played my part perfectly. I smiled in meetings, nodded at Hazel's suggestions, pretended to accept my new position in advisory capacity. But behind every polite nod was a plan forming, patient, methodical, and precise. I wasn't going to scream or fight. I was going to rebuild my throne from their ashes, because sometimes revenge doesn't start with rage. It starts with silence, and a woman who finally decides she's done being erased. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in numbers. 2 weeks after the dinner, I noticed the first fracture. A client emailed me directly. "Hazel seems confused about our terms." "Could you clarify?" Confused. That word glowed on the screen like a small victory. I drafted a short, polite response, copying Daniel and Hazel, and attached the original proposal, the one I'd written months ago. No accusations, no confrontation, just quiet evidence of who actually knew the work. The next day, Daniel called me into his office. Hazel sat beside him, trying to look composed. "Seems there's been some miscommunication," he said. I smiled. "Really? I just followed the approved document." Hazel shifted in her chair. Her hands fidgeted. "I must have mixed up the versions." "It happens," I said sweetly, "when you're new to leadership." For a moment, Daniel looked between us, two women smiling at each other like knives wrapped in velvet. He dismissed me quickly, but I could see the tension in his jaw. From that day on, mistakes started multiplying. Deadlines missed, client calls mishandled. Hazel's charm wasn't saving her anymore. Investors started asking subtle questions. "Where's your wife been in all this?" One of them said during a board call. "She was the stability of this company." Daniel brushed it off, but the doubt had been planted. At home, he grew restless. He stayed up late, pacing the study, whispering on the phone. I pretended to sleep, but I listened, every word another crack forming. And Hazel? Her smiles were getting tighter. The confidence she flaunted like perfume was fading, replaced by nervous glances and short tempers. I kept my distance, watching quietly as the empire they built on lies began to tremble. One evening, I walked past Daniel's office. Through the glass wall, I saw him rubbing his temples while Hazel argued about project discrepancies. That's when I realized something beautiful. I didn't have to destroy them. They were already destroying themselves. All I had to do was wait, and make sure someone important was watching when the final piece fell. By the time the quarterly board meeting arrived, I was ready. Daniel had insisted Hazel lead the presentation this time, to show initiative. I smiled when he said it, pretending not to notice how her voice trembled when she rehearsed her slides. She didn't understand that the numbers she was about to present were already poisoned. A few days earlier, I had sent a routine update to the board's financial advisor, a quiet email highlighting the inconsistencies in Hazel's reported expenses and asset allocations. No accusations, just data. Clean, factual, undeniable. Now the room was full. Board members lined the table. Investors dialed in over video. The air was thick with expectation. Hazel began speaking. All charm, all nerves. As you can see, our Q2 growth— Excuse me, interrupted Mr. Carlson, the lead investor. Before we proceed, could someone explain the asset discrepancy in this report? Silence. Hazel blinked. Discrepancy? He flipped through his binder. These allocations, they don't match last quarter's filings. Who approved this? Hazel glanced at Daniel. Daniel frowned. There must be a mistake. Carlson leaned forward. A mistake involving a six-figure transfer labeled under Hazel's signature? That's quite a mistake. All eyes turned to her. Hazel's smile cracked. I followed the CEO's directions. Hazel. Daniel's tone sharpened. Don't drag me into this. And just like that, the room shifted. Loyalty fractured in real time. I watched quietly from the end of the table, expression calm. One of the board members turned toward me. You were the project lead before, correct? Yes, I said softly. And I did warn that the restructuring plan might create confusion. A few heads nodded. The investor muttered something about negligent leadership. Daniel's face paled. Hazel's eyes darted between us, panic blooming. In that moment, I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need revenge that screamed. The silence around them was punishment enough. When the meeting ended, Daniel couldn't look at me. Hazel rushed out, eyes glistening. And as the board members filed past, Carlson stopped beside me and said quietly, Smart work, Mrs. Bennett. We could use more minds like yours on the executive side. I smiled. I couldn't agree more. The night arrived like a polished dream. Evelyn's mansion gleamed under 100 chandeliers, each crystal prism reflecting her meticulous taste and her inflated ego. A live orchestra played softly in the grand hall, while photographers lined the entrance, snapping images of guests in designer gowns and tuxedos. Every detail screamed wealth, power, and control, the very things she had always equated with success. I stayed behind the scenes, headset on, clipboard in hand, a silent conductor of the chaos everyone else admired. The staff moved at my direction, lights shifting, music cueing, glasses filled and refilled. No one suspected the woman orchestrating the night was the same one Evelyn had humiliated months ago. Calm and composed, I watched her glide through the crowd, laughing, basking in the admiration that had always been so intoxicating to her. Speeches began. Friends, family, and society figures took turns praising her elegance, her generosity, her impeccable taste. Every word was meticulously crafted to inflate her ego, and every word made my pulse beat faster with anticipation. I allowed a small private smile to curl at the edge of my lips, savoring the irony that she was unaware of the role I would soon play in rewriting the narrative of her life. The room shimmered with anticipation, and I felt the tension coil like a spring. Every glance, every compliment, every flash of the camera was part of the stage I had been designing for months. Guests admired the beauty of the event, but they had no idea that the most dramatic moment was yet to come. I checked the final cue one last time. The lights, the music, the video presentation, all aligned perfectly. Evelyn laughed at a joke someone made about her social dominance, oblivious to the fact that her triumph was fleeting. I watched her, still and silent, as the room celebrated her, knowing the weight of what was coming would hit harder than any applause. The beauty, the luxury, the elegance, it all masked the storm I was about to unleash. And in that suspended moment, as she preened under the spotlight, I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in months. Tonight, she would learn that control can be an illusion, and power can be stripped away in silence, orchestrated by the very person she had tried to destroy. The room held its collective breath as Evelyn sat in the center of the grand hall, the queen of her carefully curated kingdom. Guests leaned forward, champagne glasses in hand, murmurs of admiration filling the air. I stayed hidden, headset tight over my ears, heart steady but racing beneath the surface. Every cue I had planned for months was about to unfold, and there was no turning back. The butler stepped forward, silver tray in hand, carrying a small, gleaming box. "A gift, arranged by your family," he announced, voice echoing against the marble walls. Evelyn's eyes sparkled with pride, completely unaware of what lay inside. She took the box delicately, untied the ribbon, lifted the lid, and there it was, a sleek USB drive. Her brow arched as she read the attached card. "Your true gift is truth." Laughter and polite applause filled the room at first, polite confusion lingering in the air. Evelyn tilted the drive as if testing it before inserting it into the awaiting system. Suddenly, the massive projector screen flickered to life, and the lights dimmed, drawing every eye to the wall of light. The video began. First came snippets of whispered conversations, audio recordings of Evelyn instructing Daniel to distance himself, subtle manipulations that painted me as undeserving, greedy, and replaceable. Then came screenshots of text messages, Daniel's own words showing his discomfort, his blind obedience to her will, the ways she had orchestrated the divorce for her version of social perfection. Each frame cut through the air like a knife. Gasps spread across the room. Conversation ceased mid-sentence. Glasses clinked nervously. Evelyn's perfectly maintained smile faltered, a twitch at the corner of her mouth betraying panic. Daniel's face went pale. His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The realization hit him like a brick. The man who had abandoned me, who had let her rewrite our lives, now stared at undeniable proof of the truth. "Daniel," I heard her whisper. Trembling. "This isn't—" He didn't wait for her to finish. His chair scraped back, and he stormed out of the room, leaving guests in stunned silence. Evelyn's eyes followed him, frantic, her composure cracking with every heartbeat. The very power she had wielded over me for months crumbled under the weight of her own actions, exposed for all to see. I stayed hidden, headset off, letting the moment wash over me. The room buzzed with shock, confusion, and whispers of scandal. In that instant, I was no longer the humiliated wife. I was the silent orchestrator of truth, the force that turned her world upside down. The applause, when it came, was not for her. It was for justice finally served, and for me, rising from the ashes, stronger than she had ever imagined. The morning after the gala, the world seemed to hum with the aftermath of what had happened. Headlines screamed across social media and society pages. Evelyn Ross meltdown at her own birthday party, gala turns into scandal, humiliation caught on screen. Sponsors who had once clamored for her endorsement quietly withdrew their support, citing scheduling conflicts or brand realignment. Every carefully built image of perfection she had maintained for decades was unraveling before the public eye. I watched it all unfold. From the quiet of my modest apartment, cup of coffee in hand, a strange calm settling over me. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth had done its work. The woman who had delighted in my humiliation was now facing a world that no longer bent to her will. Every smirk, every whispered insult, every manipulation she had orchestrated now reflected back at her like a mirror shattering into 1,000 pieces. Daniel's engagement crumbled under the weight of exposure. His fiancée's family, horrified by the video evidence, backed out immediately, leaving him to face the reality of how deeply he had been complicit in my suffering. I wasn't present for his regret, and I didn't need to be. The power I had regained required only one thing: silence. Evelyn tried to reach me. Her messages were frantic at first, polite later, veiled threats and desperate pleas for explanation. I read each one once, then deleted them. I didn't respond. There was no need. The chaos she had tried to impose on my life had returned to her, untouchable and unavoidable. For the first time in months, I felt light. No whispers behind my back, no glances of disdain, no careful performance to maintain an illusion of belonging. The world had realigned, not with my hands raised in triumph, but with my restraint, my patience, and the inevitable consequences of truth. Evelyn's fall was complete, and I had nothing left to prove. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when Daniel showed up at my office, looking like a man who had been dragged through months of his own mistakes. His hair was disheveled, suit rumpled, and eyes shadowed with regret. He didn't knock. He just entered, as if the space belonged to him now, though I knew he had no right. I need to apologize, he stammered, voice thick with emotion. I was blind. I let her manipulate everything and I lost you. His words trailed off, swallowed by the weight of guilt he couldn't escape. I didn't interrupt, didn't soften my expression. I let him stand there, exposed, vulnerable, and unarmed against the truth of his actions. For weeks I had rehearsed what I might say in this moment, and now that it had come, my response was simple, measured, and final. You didn't lose me, I said quietly, letting each word land with the weight it deserved. You threw me away. You gave up on me when I needed you most, and nothing you do now can erase that. His face fell, the color draining as tears pooled in his eyes. For the first time, he understood, not just the humiliation I had endured, but the depth of the betrayal, the consequences of his inaction, the moments of loneliness he had never acknowledged. He tried to speak, but I shook my head gently, refusing to let him justify or explain. And then he left. I watched the door close behind him, a sound that felt like the final chapter snapping shut. Silence settled over the office, but it wasn't empty. It was full of relief, closure, and an unexpected serenity. I realized in that quiet aftermath that revenge no longer mattered. The humiliation, the betrayal, the plotting, the power plays, they had all led me here, to a place where I was free. Truly free. I leaned back in my chair and let the calm wash over me. No bitterness, no lingering anger, only the knowledge that I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my peace. Everything else, the apologies, the tears, the attempts at reconciliation, was secondary. I had already won, not through cruelty, but through survival, patience, and the clarity of knowing my own worth.